the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to a new and experimental format for the Happy Scientist. Occasionally, what I'd like to do in between our typical recorded webinars is have an interview with someone who is outside of science and has got expertise and knows best practices about some things that you might not know about, and things that are applicable in the lab, things that you could actually put into practice in your own world. And you might be surprised at what some of those things could be. So today I'm starting this interview with Cory Katuna. And Cory is somebody that I have been circling around for a couple of years now. And she's got an interesting background and an interesting voice. So I hope that y'all find this useful. So welcome, Cory. Glad to have you on the Happy Scientist.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I wonder if we could ask you to kind of give your potted bio so people can be introduced to you.
Sure. So I'm Cory Katuna. Do you want my scientific background? I mean, I don't have a scientific background,
Well,
but
I mean, it's, whatever you think might be useful to these folks.
cool. So maybe I'll just kind of hop right into what I'm doing currently. I co-own a company with my friend who you know, Rome Flout. Our company is called The Light Touch, and we host mentorships and retreats for women based on what I call practical spirituality. But we have a million different ways we talk about that, enlightenment or day-to-day enlightenment or emotional maturity or this really, you can look at this from so many angles: communication, friendship, realizing your potential, getting the most out of life. I was just listening to one of your episodes where you talked about perspective and sort of knowing your instrument, like what is this thing? What are its biases? How does it orient? How is it operating? I think that's so relevant for scientists and everyone. But that's what we do is we work with women in the context of a container that might be a 6-month container or a weekend retreat or a week-long retreat. And we sort of dig into a lot of these topics, and we really come at it from the framework of practical spirituality, or making spirituality relevant and useful and accessible on a day-to-day basis. So I also have a podcast called Perspective, which just started it. I'm 9 episodes deep. So far, it's just me riffing on the topic of perspective and many different topics. And I might get into interviews like you're starting to do. And I work with Bentinho Massaro, who's a spiritual teacher. He has an app, a school, an online school called Massaro University. I'm one of those facilitators and one of the coaches on his team. But I've been working with him, producing events, co-hosting one of his podcasts. I was just emceeing some of his events on his Europe tour the last few weeks. So I've been sort of closely connected to his team for the last 10 years. I think that's everything that's relevant for this
All
convo.
right, cool. I did want to comment on one thing that you started with, that that you run events for women. Now, there's a lot of chatter out in the world about how STEM careers are understaffed by women. And in my past experience working in technology, I knew almost no women in technology. But I have to say, when it comes to biology, I know more women who are biologists than men. So apparently some inroads are being made there. But
Interesting.
yeah, so it may be that some of the folks listening will find it interesting that someone with your background is speaking to us. So the topic I wanted to talk about today is called the consciousness hard problem. And And at first blush, the biologists out there, the bioscientists might be going, I work with single-celled animals or plants, and you're going to talk about consciousness. Why would we do that? And so I wanted to kind of give folks an introduction to this notion of the hard problem. The hard problem was brought up by um, someone named David Chalmers. Now, he is a cognitive scientist and a philosopher, kind of crosses over there. His BA is in mathematics. I mean, this guy is a true scientist, right? So when he talked about this, he talked about the easy problem and the hard problem in consciousness. And the easy problem is the stuff that you bioscientists are dealing with every day in the lab. And you're going to laugh at that. Oh, it's easy, huh? But the point is it's stuff you can measure. It's the things that where this which circuits light up, how attention shifts, how memory forms, how sensory data gets integrated. You know, these are tractable because we can measure them and model them and link them to behavior. But the hard problem is a different kettle of fish. What Chalmers talked about there was it's a question of why is all this activity accompanied by subjective experience? Why does brain activity feel like anything at all? You know, why does red look and feel like red, you know, instead of just being wavelengths or firing patterns, right? This is the difference between the easy problem and the hard problem. The hard problem, there will never be a measurement for. So, I mean, science is all about measurement. And so you're not going to get to measure this. So does it matter? Now you may look at this and go, well, I don't know that there's any consciousness going on with these neurons specifically. You know, it's got to be a more complex creature before that matters. But there is stuff that we can observe there that can only be explained as being subjective. So, but before I riff on any further on this, I'll let you get a word in here, Cory. What might you have to say in opening about the hard problem?
I love this topic so much. And I can give you a little background. So I come from a science family. My dad is a neurologist. My mom is a medical doctor. My sister is a medical doctor. My brother-in-law, a medical doctor.
Hmm.
And my dad especially is like into philosophy and he's into these conversations with me. I've been in spirituality for 10, 15 years. He's been more and more in, I mean, he's a reader. So we'll have these debates. We talk about these things a lot. So I guess I just have to say that I love that this topic is where we're starting, the hard problem of consciousness. And specifically what you said about we'll never be able to measure it. That's kind of what I get to with my dad in our debates is it's yeah, it's this is so fun. I wonder what we're going to get into in this conversation, but like the fact that we can't measure something, the fact that it is the context, not the content, that the thing we're talking about is the context or even the source of or from the metaphor of the dream. It's the dreamer, not any of the contents of the dream.
Mhm.
So, and then if science, and I don't mean the scientific attitude, I just mean science, material science, measuring science, is of the dream. It's made out of the dream, the fabric of the dream. It's not before that, it's not beyond that. How do you begin to approximate something that is its context? So, and I just think it's a fascinating conversation.
Sure. Um, would you have any thoughts of how would somebody who's in the lab, who's, you know, they're looking at a petri dish of pretty simple creatures, um, do you see any application for them there, or even just something that might color their thinking about the work they're doing that comes out of this understanding of subjectiveness as opposed to the objectiveness?
Okay, I suppose what could be relevant there is that as long as you are identified as a scientist with your whole personality, with the way that you usually do things, with the way that you interpret data, the way that you set up the experiment, the way you ask the questions, the answers you might be looking for without even knowing you're looking for them. That's all really hard to see from its own perspective. So that's like the water that you're swimming in, it's your personality or it's your identity. It's really hard to look at that if you don't if you don't first become aware of what is aware of that consciousness itself.
Mm.
So that would be if my intention was to become absolutely unbiased. If I was a scientist in the lab and I wanted to master objectivity, I would have to start with the hard problem of consciousness.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that it is important that a scientist get good at the objective part. It's it's this is not saying that somebody who is focused on the objective part of their work is somehow missing the boat. Um, that that role serves a purpose and is useful, but it's a role that you can choose to turn on and off. In other words, you don't have to be objective solely all the time. You can interject subjectivity on purpose to say, what am I missing here? What do I know here? What do I not know here? What don't I know that I don't know here? Each of those views of your experiments or your data is different, and they each yield different results. And the fact is that sometimes we have to break out of the box. And that's one of the things about discovery. Discovery is an important area in science, and that discovery doesn't often come from the objective stuff. It comes from the subjective. It's when you stop thinking about it the way everybody always thinks about it, and especially the people that are deeply immersed, that you greatly respect, you're going to have to stop thinking like them sometime. I'm not saying you should never think like them. It's useful. But sometimes you got to go, how would somebody who doesn't know anything about phenotypes look at this? You know, uh, who's not only focused on the data, how would they see it? So it makes for an exciting possibility for someone who's doing research and wants to keep moving forward.
Right. I think that's interesting. And I realize my own ignorance when we say science or like scientists. That just feels so broad to me. I think there's so much science that just really I don't know. I really don't know. So I can imagine so many scientists don't need for whatever their work is. It really is just from point A to point B, or just trying to understand why this leads to this, or build a machine that does this. In which case, this hard problem of consciousness really, really might be irrelevant to them, unless they're just curious, or unless they want to. So one of the ways Bentinho talks about this, Bentinho, I mentioned him, um, is what is the one thing? What is the one thing we know for sure? So, and this, again, we come back to the dream metaphor. So, in your dream, you think you know for sure that you're moving around and you're, in London, and now you're on a slide and now you're talking to a duck, and you think you know that for sure. And then you wake up and you know for sure that you didn't know those things for sure. So it's this weird humility that kind of happens in a way, this humbling that happens when you wake up. Like, oh my God, I was certain that that duck was talking to me. I was so sure. I could see its feathers. We were conversing. It was helpful. I was so sure. And then I woke up and I see I was totally deluded. And a similar thing happens when you begin to look at consciousness itself. the thing that is looking through my eyes, the thing that is hearing through my ears, the thing that is aware of my thoughts before my thoughts. That is the only thing I know for sure. Otherwise, I have sounds coming in my ear, and I could say that's because of something happening over there that I'm hearing that's really over there. I could say that, but all I know for sure is that I'm having the experience of that sound somewhere in here. I can't say for sure that my mind isn't making that up. So I don't know how, I don't necessarily think that's relevant for every branch of science. And I really just don't know about that. But for anybody who's curious about what you know for sure, um, without guesswork, without leaning on a few assumptions, then I think it could be relevant to explore this.
Right. And I think that we have to recognize that the our relationship with what we see or with what we hear is very different than the seeing and hearing of a variety of animals, for instance.
Hmm.
An eagle sees far better than us, and there are animals that hear far better than us, and they do it different. And shrimp see more colors than us.
That's
um,
true.
yeah, yeah, they see colors we cannot see. And they may have the best eyesight of anything of any animal. But
Wow.
the point of all that is that at some point you have to realize what we're calling reality is just our version of it. It's just how we can experience it. And it even varies from person to person. You know, some people have perfect pitch. They know exactly what note something is when they hear it. And other people are like, what's pitch? They don't have any idea. And even over the course of your lifetime, you see things change. The way I could physically see when I was younger is different than the way I physically see now. It's changed. And I won't argue that it's worse because it may not actually be worse because we learn how to make it work, right? And we learn how to meld our senses. So if somebody isn't doesn't have strong sight, they may develop stronger hearing. Not because they're biologically able to do so, but because they're making a choice to develop that understanding. Some people don't bother to develop certain kinds of understanding because they don't need to. And like if you're working in a lab and you got to deal with some things that are very touchy, very that require a light touch. Um, but if you're a bricklayer, you wouldn't look at it that way. There, you're more interested in how do I stay strong, and how do I develop my endurance? Characteristics that may not be as important in the lab, you know.
Mhm.
And then we look at it and have a subjective experience about it. It feels a certain way. Some people, it really feels good to feel strong. Other people, it really feels good to feel smart, you know. um, and they're applicable in different areas. And other people really like to feel kind, or compassionate. Uh, and there are choices that we all make. And it's not like compassion isn't useful in the lab. It's not like strength isn't useful in the lab, but it's a different mix depending on how you're applying
Makes sense.
it. So we've hit a lull. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to see if there's any particular strain of this you want to bring in.
Cool. Well, one thing that comes to mind, which I don't actually, I don't know exactly what the hard problem of consciousness is, by the way, is that why is there subjective experience? Is that what the hard problem of consciousness is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's the why, but also the how.
Right,
How do we have a subjective experience? Because I can't measure it.
right. Well, so I look at this from both a subjective, spiritual, meditative angle, but also from a practical angle. And I think that just comes from my upbringing and the types of debates I was having at home. And um, so I'm always on the lookout for science or for proof, for evidence to confirm what I experience to be true in my meditations, or what I find to be true in my direct experience, in my, you could say, spiritual seeking. So I'm always kind of on the hunt for this. And I was recently watching Alex O'Connor. He calls himself the Cosmic Skeptic on YouTube. Uh, talk to someone about whether consciousness is fundamental. So whether consciousness is fundamental, or whether consciousness, so meaning, is consciousness somehow just already there and that gives rise to material?
Mhm.
Or is consciousness a result of particles interacting in a certain way that eventually produces consciousness? Um, so I've been interested in seeing what people find, and so far it seems like there's nothing definitive in any direction. But in my experience, in my meditative experience, consciousness is before matter. So you can get, so literally in a meditation, what I will do, and many sages and teachers and enlightened beings will talk about something similar. I will, you could say, collect everything that I can possibly be aware of. Everything I can possibly be aware of. And anybody can do this. So it doesn't matter how non-spiritual you are. Collect every possible thing you can be aware of. And at first, it's like that curtain, that window, that table, that, I'm aware, I'm aware. And then you can get a little more subtle and go, okay, but also I'm aware of my eyes, and I'm aware of my skin and what it feels like to be in my body. Well, okay, I'm aware of thoughts. I'm aware of this sense of like I'm over here, this sort of nodal point of where I am in relationship to other things, this sense of uh, location or locality. Um, I'm aware of time passing. And if you can begin to collect everything that you're aware of, and this might feel like sort of like getting a lasso around yourself, like your body and your mind and it's kind of like you collect everything, like, yeah, okay. And you're collecting it and you're collecting it and you're collecting it. At some point, it seems like you kind of got it all. Like it's all in front of you, like you've got it lassoed. And then maybe some idea will come up and it's like, yeah, but I'm over here doing that. And then that goes into the lasso. So really to collect everything that you can possibly be aware of. And this can take an hour. It's a subtle practice and it's kind of abstract, and then you start thinking again, and then you got to, collect that thought too, put that thought in the collection basket. And then at some point, once you've kind of got that stable, you you some agent, some free agent that is not in the collection basket is holding it, and you get a little glimpse of like, what is that? Who is that? Hang on. I have some free agency beyond everything that I can experience. So everything that I can experience, including my identity, including my sense of self, is already collected, and I'm doing that. What the hell? How? So that was one of my sort of first realizations 10 years ago or 8 years ago or something, was like, wait, what is this? This is somehow not my mind. This is before my mind. This is before my personality, my sense of I'm Cory, I'm over here. There's a me that contains my experience, that contains my even my awareness.
Right.
So I guess what I started with was saying that I'm sort of interested and on the hunt for scientific explanations for this, because at least in my experience and in many others from disparate traditions and different paths and different geographies over different times in history are finding the same thing or pointing in the same direction.
Right. Well, I think it maps pretty well to basic research in biology. It is also a basic research. It's just in a little different realm. And I want to say for those listening, if you're not comfortable with something like meditation or, say, prayer as an example. Here's something I think you can be comfortable with: contemplation. I suspect you do a lot of contemplation. You spend a lot of time there, and it's the softer area. It's it's not instead of the data, but it's just the edges around it. So if you open up your thinking a bit in that regard, even in your own research, to start looking at what is around that which I'm studying, what is around the data I'm collecting, you may well discover things that no one else has discovered, or if they haven't talked about it, or they haven't promoted it. You might be the person who is the cheerleader for that new discovery. So this is why I'm wanting to have these interviews. I want to bring in this kind of extra thinking to bioscientists to help them to see a bigger world in their work, because it's easy to get stuck down in the weeds. But and from Cory's personal experience of hanging around neuroscientists and doctors, that forced her to think more than just about what her own personal experience was. So I hope that's useful to everybody. Now, if you like listening to Cory, I can be a cheerleader for her podcast. It's called Perspective by Cory Katuna. Check it out. It's pretty interesting. So that being said, Cory, is there anything you'd like to say and wrap up?
Let's see. Well, I love what you said about contemplation. Um, I love that. In a way, I mean, just that sort of open-minded thinking. I think of it as like the difference between like focusing down on something with already with an intention versus like looking out and considering and contemplating and letting your mind wander and sort of letting new ideas arrive to you. And it reminds me of all throughout my youth. I loved sitting in the back of the car on like a road trip or driving to basketball practice or whatever, and just getting to look out the window and contemplate. And actually, the word contemplate is what it felt like. I remember one of the things I would often contemplate is like, what would it look like? Okay, so I can imagine what colors look like, but what would it look like if it was only clear, the color clear, but infinitely? So all the way to the end. Like what if there was no, it didn't eventually fade out into black or eventually fade out into white, but if it just was clear forever. And I remember I've spent hours just trying to like see if I could imagine that. Just see if I could um like find that. And so I think that is a good type of example of contemplation where you just sort of pose yourself a question and then see if your abstracting mind can um can open up into the answer, and it might totally surprise you.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And I'll bet you people often have those experiences, even from their own childhood, where they've done stuff like that and they've had it beat out of them. No, I gotta follow the protocol. You know, I have to follow the manual. Like, no, you don't. I mean, yeah, you should, but you don't only have to do that. Do more. Start asking questions that don't have answers. Just to ask them and see what happens, see what comes up.
totally. So in this, I'm just out of curiosity, what would you say your intention with a conversation like this might be for some of the scientists that you're speaking to, like from your perspective of your audience?
Yeah. I really want people to see a bigger world than the world that they see. Realize that you're looking at a facsimile of reality, just an individual perspective. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that perspective. It may be perfectly accurate within its limitations, but the limitations are artificial. You chose them for yourself. You can let them go.
I love that. It is really I would even call that practical spirituality.
There you go. I noticed that when I was waving my hand around that the hand up icon came up on my screen.
Oh yeah.
Technology has got its own initiatives going on.
Funny.
All right. Well, folks, I thank you for listening today. Cory, thank you so much for being on The Happy Scientist. I think that you really added something here. If you as listeners, if you found any value in this, please comment on it and let us know. And there are other people out there that I can bring in. So on that note, I will say thank you to everyone, and continue being a happy scientist, and continue to grow in your career.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenneth, and thank you, everybody.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.